There's a new research note from Bloomberg that global electric vehicle sales is now headed over 14 million. This is a 35% growth over last year. What's the big problem? Well, the United States could be the odd market out and might be falling behind. In theory, the US should have already reached a takeoff point for EVs as they've now hit that 8% of sales. But unless costs go down further, specifically in a unique market in the US, this could take longer. Let's explore more what this looks like. We've got Jeff Lutz with us. He's an ex-C-level supply chain executive and chief quality officer. He worked at multiple Fortune 100 companies. He's now running his own consulting firm. Thank you so much, Jeff.
Yeah, great to be with you, Herbert. This is a really important topic.
This is one that's really big because we're looking at it at the global level. We're watching how China and Europe are taking off. What's happening with the US? Why the US different market? Why is it not taking off? Will it fall behind? And what will happen if that's the case? Let's dive deeper into that. So this was brought to my attention from Alexandra Merz. She's known on X as Tesla Boomer Mama. She has very good, just kind of her finger on the pulse of all the latest research. And she found this Bloomberg research that came out. And basically, the point is that global EV sales are headed for 14 million sales this year. That's 35% up from last year. China's driving the increase. Europe has been surprisingly resilient. Why is the US further behind? This is the graph that they showed. Let me show that graph right here. EV sales head for another record year. So you can see that China's the blue, the purple's Europe, the green is North America. Then you got South Korea, you got Japan, and the rest of the world. So while you see the green is growing, it is small at 8 to 10%. I think it's 8% versus the Europe. And look at China just dominating in terms of more than 50% of all EVs being sold is actually in China. This is what they're saying. So the US could become odd market out in EV success story. So it said, okay, well, let's take a look at where we're sitting here. The good news is that there's tremendous growth, another record for the industry. China is driving that increase. The nation is firmly in the mass market phase. So China's still in the mass market, but the United States is still in the early adoption phase. So basically, they think it's just the people who are interested in the green world and in EVs. With the battery-powered vehicles making up 38% and 32% of passenger car sales in August and September. So they kind of, kind of swing between 30% to 38%. So it's growing. And then Europe, very resilient. Sales in this region are on track to climb by fifth this year, 20% to around 3.3 million. Subsidy cuts in markets like Germany could still impact the final tally, but the US is falling farther behind. They've crossed the 1 million mark for the first time, and they're on pace to climb more than 40%. But why is it that they're not growing? So the good news is that Tesla Model Y and BYD are doing very, very well. And BYD is a Chinese auto manufacturer. Chinese auto companies also going into Europe, and they're really building out. So and then the other good news is that the battery prices are falling even further. They're expected to fall quite significantly this coming year. But the US. So let me pause there before we get to the US. Jeff, tell me what you're thinking about the overall report here.
Yeah, we're in a news cycle where hourly we're talking about things, we're messaging, we're on X, and we're seeing things real time. We're aware of Tesla price changes in minutes and seconds. I will tell you this: what's ingrained in people is what's happened over the last couple of years, which is just starting this year. And January 1st, Tesla Model Y was, long range was, $60,000 plus, and it was for the most of the prior year. And these things take time, and so the perception of EVs cost more, that's sticking. That's going to take some time, especially when you have legacy EV that they're incapable of producing EVs at lower price segments. They completely missed the boat of where people and what price tiers and what volumes they're going to be buying product at. So they have the Cadillac Lyriq up in the 60s, where you have a better performing Model Y in the 40s. But why is this happening in the US? There's a number of factors. That number one is that perception of they're more expensive. There's a political thing that's going on in Europe that exists less. sorry, in the U.S. that exists less elsewhere. It's almost non-existent, I would say, in China when it comes to the politics behind EV in terms of, one particular party. By the way, I don't subscribe to that, and I'm certainly an outlier to that case. I don't look at my political party and say, well, what should I be doing from a technology perspective, trying to make those decisions, based on other things. But it is a factor because where people get their information and news sources and print media and TV and so forth, they're talking down the EV and the transition to the EV. So you have the pricing perception, you have politics, you have the charging infrastructure, which is a major problem for non-Teslas, even to this day in November. It's a major problem for them, and it won't start improving until next year when Tesla opens up access to a good portion of their chargers, not all of them. So you have the charging infrastructure piece, and then you have the cost of gasoline and you compare the cost here, it's anywhere in the $3 to $5 range in the U.S. For a gallon of gasoline. I believe that equivalent is, in the $8 to $9.50 range in most parts of Europe. So you have all these factors. Then you have what the types of vehicles that people are purchasing in the U.S. is a large volume of pickup trucks that are being purchased. And until Rivian, and really only Rivian, because Ford has decided to not put the F-150 into mass production. They've only done a few thousand of the vehicles this year. They don't have an alternative to go to. And a lot of people are going to be skittish on going to a brand new startup company for their pickup truck. Pickup truck purchasers are going to be a little bit more skittish, even though the product is done well. So you have the types of vehicles, you have the pricing perception, you have the political side of it, you have the charging infrastructure. Those are the drivers, I think, that have been putting the U.S. and the cost of gasoline versus, the cost of electricity. I always tell this to people. An equivalent hyper sports car type vehicle to the Model S Plaid, is going to get somewhere on the order of 12 to 15 miles per gallon of gasoline. It's going to cost you in the U.S. $80 to $100 to fill that car up. And I tell people I fill my car for about $9 at home charging overnight. And, until you show that disparity to people, or just take the Model 3 and the Model Y, for example, it's probably $7 or $8 to basically get you, 280 to 320 miles of driving on a comparable car. That would probably be $50 or $60. But anyway, those have been the detractors, and that awareness piece of it. I think those have been the detractors to why the U.S. is behind. Now, the one thing I will say about going into the next year is I think the IRA tax credit has been somewhat of a flop in the U.S. in year one. I think I do applaud the bill. I applaud the effort. I think they were just trying to get it out there as soon as possible by making it a tax credit. But for people that are monthly, which are most people, are sensitive to their monthly costs, they can't wait 12 to 16 months to get their tax return, and they may or may not get, the deduction to flow through or not. They're going to have that uncertainty. So when this moves in the U.S. to point of sale, and you wake up on January 1st and the Model 3 or Y is going to be, 10, 15, 20% cheaper, depending on which version, it's going to have a meaningful impact.
Very good point. That's the big one, right? When that happens, it's going to have a meaningful impact. U.S. sales could take off. I'm going to share everything you said is exactly what this research pointed out, but they point out one or two more things that are slightly different. I want to get your opinion on it. So they said several of the issues why the U.S. is lagging behind, right? Because of here in the U.S., big pickup trucks are a big market as opposed to China and Europe. And when you try to electrify them, it's really hard because of excessive size and weight. Now, they did talk about the politics here as well. The vast majority sells so far in blue states versus the red states. And then this other point, which is in theory, right, we hit the 8%. So this should be the takeoff point typically, but we're still in the we're not in the mass market. We need to get into the mass market. And then the issue that they say why it won't get there is because of cost. You need to have, this is something that needs to be brought down in cost. What's your points on those two major opinions?
Yeah, I think if Tesla could have done it all over, they would have wanted to have the $25,000 vehicle available a little bit earlier, maybe, you know, up to a year. Like if that was available at some point in 2024 next year, I think the adoption curve, first off, I think the adoption curve is going to continue marching upward. I think we're going to be 10, 12% in the US next year. And the reason is EVs are, again, if you compare January pricing of EVs of 2023 to January of 2024, they are meaningfully lower. And especially with Tesla, and especially with the IRA credit and the state credits that are also coming. There's a state credit right now in Illinois, for example, that you can add to the $7,500 credit. It runs from November 1st to January 31st, and you would get an additional $4,000 basically mailed to you as a check from the state of Illinois. So you're going to have $11,500 off of a 3 or Y, or maybe even a qualifying Model X. It's going to be significant. So I think the pricing piece of it, I think Tesla, if they could have pulled in the 25, great. But I also think if you look at, I mean, I think if we do the math on this, I mean, their prices are easily 25, maybe 30% lower than they were a year ago prior. So I actually think that Tesla is going to, and you have Ford and GM doing a little bit of capitulation and not adding capacity. And also they're not shipping to their current installed capacity. And the reason they're not doing that is the more EVs they ship, the more money they lose. So I actually think Tesla is going to soak up some of that with the IRA credit coming to point of sale. I think the EV adoption curve is going to get a little bit of a hit in the arm. I know I'm a contrarian to this view in the US, but I think that's a big factor. I think Tesla is going to soak up some of that. And depending on how many Cybertruck, I don't think the Cybertruck number is going to be meaningful, but I don't think it's going to be insignificant either in that mix and entering that pickup truck segment. So I think the EV adoption curve will move on. Again, we didn't talk about this, but it was 5% the year before in 2022. To go from 5% to 8%, depending on what point of the year you snap the line, it was somewhere between a 45 to 60% jump in EV adoption in the US. That's a big move year over year. I think people are looking at this quarterly and trying to look at the quarterly view, but this is one of those things where you have to like step back and look at it on an annualized basis, and you'll see that growth. So I don't know. In summary, I think we would have been way up the S curve maybe if the 25K vehicle was available next year, but without it, I still think we're going to make a healthy jump up.
And with the IRA as well. So global electric vehicle sales are growing crazily good. It's going, Europe and China is fantastic. US is slower, but I agree with you. I think it's going to continue to tick up. The Cybertruck is now out, and that addresses the issue of a large pickup truck being able to be electrified. So maybe that will also take off. Thank you so much. And then the IRA point that you made is big. Thank you so much, Jeff. Follow him on X at the Jeff Lutz. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Herbert.